Welcome to NASCAR Nation. Please subscribe to channel so that we can complete our family of 5,000 subscribers.
It's illegal. SVG just exposed Larson's secret engine tweaks. This isn't garage gossip. It's a direct accusation that has the entire NASCAR garage whispering. Shane Van Gisbergen looked at Kyle Larson's data, saw something impossible, and decided to go public. One driver exposed another's hidden advantage, and now the sport is scrambling. And honestly, the sheer arrogance of a Hendrick Motorsports team already sitting 7th in points, still pushing the rulebook to its breaking point, makes me furious. Regular fans spend thousands just to sit in the stands, yet these elite teams are rewriting software codes to gain an extra 2 miles per hour because their golden boy hasn't won in 48 races. It's the kind of entitlement that proves they care about nothing except keeping their advantage, no matter what it costs the integrity of the sport. But look past the outrage. SVG isn't just making noise, he's making a case. He identified what insiders are now calling the fuel cut loophole, a brilliant software manipulation designed to bypass NASCAR's fuel flow limits while leaving no physical trace. Hendrick's engineers thought they were untouchable. SVG just proved they're not. Let me show you exactly what he found, why it's illegal, and what happens now that the secret is out. Personally, I think SVG just did the sport a massive favor. Do you agree? Or do you think he's just trying to get inside Larson's head? Drop it below. And if no one else is willing to ask the real questions about what's happening behind the scenes, that's exactly what this channel is for. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now, to understand why this accusation carries so much weight, you need to know the history. Shane Van Gisbergen and Kyle Larson have been circling each other for 2 seasons. Their first real encounter came at the Charlotte Roval in 2025. SVG, still finding his feet on ovals, ran Larson hard through the infield section. He bumped Larson's rear bumper in turn 7, expecting room. Larson didn't give an inch. After the race, SVG said something that stuck, like a switch flipped. He got angry. That wasn't just a driver complaining. Larson admitted SVG was faster that day. He's on another level on these road courses. He's far ahead of all of us. Respect? Sure. But in NASCAR, respect only lasts until the next green flag. And at Atlanta this year, it evaporated completely. Larson, running stage 2, tried to block SVG's run. He misjudged it. His left rear clipped SVG's right front and sent Larson spinning into the wall. His day ended. Larson owned it. "That one was on me," he said. He took the blame. That's what veterans do. But SVG remembered. And he remembered something else. Something that started bothering him the moment he watched Larson's onboard footage from that weekend. Most fans don't realize that drivers study everyone's data. SVG's engineers at Trackhouse Racing pulled up Larson's telemetry. They weren't looking for anything unusual. They were just preparing for the next race. But then, they noticed something. A small detail. Tiny, really. Something that didn't add up. Nothing they could prove. Nothing they could even name. Just something off. SVG didn't say anything at first. He didn't have answers. He had questions. And in NASCAR, questions don't win championships. But they do make you watch closer. Think about what that means for a driver like SVG. He left supercars in Australia, where he was a legend. He came to NASCAR to prove he could win on ovals. He's already done that twice this season. But he's still fighting for respect. He's still fighting for a chase spot. And now he's fighting against a guy who by every measure should be beatable. Larson hasn't won in 48 races. He's vulnerable, and yet SVG couldn't shake the feeling that Larson's car was doing something his wasn't. And the more SVG watched, the more those questions turned into something he couldn't ignore. That's when he started digging. Not publicly, not angrily, quietly, lap by lap, run by run. And what he found, what he's about to share, is what NASCAR fans have been waiting for. It wasn't just one race. SVG went back through Larson's entire season. Every practice session, every qualifying run, every race. He looked at the data from tracks where Larson was strong and tracks where he struggled. The pattern was consistent. At every track, Larson's car was maintaining speed on the straights in a way that didn't match the horsepower numbers. It was like his engine had an extra gear that nobody else could access. SVG's engineers started calling it the ghost horsepower. You couldn't see it, you couldn't hear it. But it was there in the numbers. Every time Larson's throttle hit 100%, something happened that didn't happen in any other Chevrolet. His engine didn't just accelerate, it surged. A brief, almost imperceptible spike in power that lasted just long enough to give him an edge at the end of every straightaway. That spike was the key, and once SVG knew what to look for, he saw it everywhere. He saw it at the end of every run. He saw it in the way Larson's car pulled away from drivers who had better track position. He saw it in the way Larson could defend his position on restarts when other cars were faster. It was subtle, it was clever, and if SVG was right, it was illegal. But first, you need to understand what every team in the garage already knows about the 2026 rulebook. NASCAR made a major change this year. They bumped the horsepower at certain tracks up to 750. That extra power means engines are working harder, running hotter, and pushing fuel systems to their absolute limit. Every team has to adjust, and every team knows exactly where the boundaries are. The rulebook is thick, but the critical section is simple. Fuel flow cannot exceed a specific rate. Period. No exceptions. That's the hard line. What's legal? Standard adjustments, air-fuel ratios, camshaft timing, things that every engine shop does to find an extra tenth of a second. What's illegal? Anything that bypasses the fuel flow limit. Anything that lets the engine burn more fuel than the rules allow. That's where the line is drawn, and in 2025, a team crossed that line. They were caught. The penalty was brutal, $100,000, and they lost 100 championship points. That team didn't just lose money, they lost their season. That penalty sent a shockwave through the garage. Every team with a technical director started reviewing their own systems. Every engineer started double-checking their own code. The message was clear. NASCAR was watching, and they were willing to drop the hammer. But some teams think they're smarter than the rulebook. They think they can find the loopholes that nobody else can see, and according to SVG, Larson's team found one, a gray area so clever that it took months for anyone to even suspect it. Here's the thing about gray areas. They're not accidents, they're engineered. They're designed by people who spend every waking hour studying the rulebook for the one word, the one phrase, the one technical detail that nobody else has exploited yet. And if SVG is right, if the rumors are true, then Larson's engineers found something that changes everything. Every driver in the garage knows the feeling of chasing a faster car. You see them pull away on the straight, you hear their engine note change, you wonder what they're doing that you're not. SVG wondered that about Larson, and then he stopped wondering. He started looking. The more footage SVG reviewed, the more convinced he became. Larson's car was doing something on the straights that nobody else's could replicate. His lap times didn't drop off in the final stages of a run. His engine maintained peak power longer than any other Chevrolet on the track. Little things, things that could be explained away as good engineering. But SVG knew good engineering. He'd worked with the best teams in the world, and what he was seeing wasn't just good. It was too good. He called his engineers. They ran the numbers again. They compared Larson's telemetry against every other Camaro in the field, and that's when the pattern emerged. Larson's fuel consumption at full throttle was different, not by much, a fraction of a percent. But that fraction translated to a 2-mile-per-hour advantage at the end of every straightaway. 2 miles per hour. That's the difference between first and third. That's the difference between winning and losing. SVG's engineers started mapping the data visually. They created side-by-side comparisons of Larson's throttle traces versus the rest of the field. The difference was small but undeniable. At the exact moment every other engine hit the fuel cut limit, Larson's engine kept pulling. It didn't drop off. It didn't stutter. It just kept going. That shouldn't have been possible. The team ran the numbers again and again. Every time, the result was the same. Larson's engine was operating outside the normal parameters. Not physically. Physically it was clean. But the software? That was a different story. And that's when SVG knew he had something. SVG had a theory, but a theory wasn't proof. So he started digging deeper, and what he found would change everything. The breakthrough came when SVG's team looked at Larson's ECU data. The ECU controls everything in a modern race car. It manages fuel delivery, ignition timing, throttle response, every critical function. And Larson's ECU logs showed something unusual, a parameter that didn't match any other Chevrolet in the field. Not a physical difference, a software difference, something that existed only in lines of code, something that no post-race inspection would ever find unless someone knew exactly where to look. This is where it gets technical, but stick with me, because this is the part that matters. The fuel cut system works like a governor. It says, when the engine reaches this RPM, cut the fuel to prevent damage. Larson's team raised that threshold, just a little, just enough to let the engine rev higher without the fuel cut kicking in. The result? More power at the top end, more speed on the straights, and no physical evidence because it was all in the software. The official NASCAR rule says the fuel flow rate must not exceed a certain limit. Larson's team didn't change the fuel flow. They changed the engine's behavior so it could run at higher RPM while staying under the fuel flow limit. It's not technically a violation of the fuel flow rule. It's a violation of the spirit of the rule. But NASCAR doesn't police intent. They police hardware. And hardware-wise, Larson's car was clean. The software, though, that's where the gray area got very, very dark. SVG's engineers told him they had enough to raise questions, but not enough to file a formal protest. The difference was just a few lines of code. Larson's team could argue it was a calibration error. They could argue it was a one-off adjustment, they could argue anything, and without a full forensic audit of the ECU, there was no way to prove intent. That's the thing about software cheating. It's almost impossible to catch, unless you catch it in the act. But SVG didn't want to file a protest. He wanted to expose the truth, and that meant going public. Knowing the tweak was one thing, but SVG knew that without hard evidence, it was just talk. So he went public, and the garage exploded. The comments came during a post-race interview. SVG was asked about Larson's straight-line speed. He didn't dodge the question, he didn't brush it off with a compliment. He said something that made every reporter in the room sit up straight. I'm not saying anything is illegal, but I'm saying someone should look at the fuel cut data. It doesn't match what everyone else is running. He didn't accuse, he suggested. He didn't scream, he whispered. And that whisper is still echoing through the garage. Within hours, SVG's comments were everywhere. Social media exploded. Forums lit up. Other drivers started weighing in, some anonymously, some publicly. The rumor mill went into overdrive, and at the center of it all sat Kyle Larson's team, trying to figure out how to respond. Larson's response was predictable. He called it sour grapes. He said SVG was frustrated because he's fighting for the chase, and Larson is already locked in. He said his team follows the rules, and he's right. Hendrick Motorsports has one of the best compliance records in the sport. They don't get caught, they don't make mistakes. But that's exactly why SVG's accusation stings so much, because Hendrick doesn't make mistakes. And the only thing more dangerous than a cheater is a team that's never been caught. But here's the twist. SVG didn't just talk, he released data, a side-by-side comparison of his own car's fuel cut behavior and Larson's. The difference was visible, not massive, not enough to prove anything in court, but enough to make every driver in the paddock take notice. Enough to make NASCAR pay attention. Enough to start a conversation that nobody can stop. Larson said it was nothing. But the data doesn't lie, and now NASCAR has to decide, is this a violation or just genius engineering? The rulebook has a clause. Section 12.3.4, it says, any modification to the ECU that alters the intended performance parameters of the engine is prohibited unless explicitly approved. That's the loophole. Larson's team will argue the fuel cut adjustment is within the intended parameters. SVG will argue it's an alteration. And somewhere in between, NASCAR has to make a call. A former crew chief, speaking on condition of anonymity, put it this way: everyone in the garage knows what Hendrick is doing. They're not stupid, they're not reckless, they're just smart enough to stay one step ahead of the inspectors. If SVG forced them to move up their timeline, that's bad for Hendrick, but it's great for the sport. And that's the heart of this story. It's not about one race. It's not about one driver. It's about whether NASCAR's enforcement can keep up with NASCAR's technology. Every team is pushing the boundaries. Every team is looking for an edge. And every team knows that the difference between legal and illegal is often just a single line of code. SVG is fighting for his chase life. He's sitting 16th in points, just 31 points ahead of Ryan Preece. He needs every position, every point, every break. And instead of just driving faster, he decided to expose someone who he believes is driving unfairly. That takes courage. That also takes a certain kind of desperation. But desperate or not, SVG has the garage's attention. The next race is Daytona, the final regular season race. SVG needs a good finish. Larson wants to prove he's still the best. And now, there's a cloud of suspicion hanging over the #5 car that wasn't there before. Every time Larson pulls away on a straight, people will wonder. Every time he wins a drag race to the line, people will ask questions. That's SVG's real victory. He planted doubt. Whatever happens in the next few days, one thing is certain. SVG and Larson will never look at each other the same way again. So where does this leave us? A top-tier team accused of a technical violation. A driver fighting for his playoff life, choosing to go public instead of staying quiet. A sport struggling to police its own technology. And a rivalry that just became the most talked about storyline in the garage. SVG exposed something. Whether it's illegal or just clever, the damage is done. The trust is broken. And when these two drivers line up at Daytona, it won't just be about the race. It'll be about everything that happened in the weeks before. Every accusation, every denial, every piece of data that SVG released to the world. And one more thing. This isn't the first time a team has been accused of a software violation. It won't be the last. The technology moves faster than the rulebook. That's the nature of modern motorsport. But when a driver chooses to expose his rival instead of letting the officials handle it quietly, that's when the sport becomes personal. That's when the rivalry becomes unforgettable. Some drivers race for wins. Some race for championships. SVG is racing for something bigger now. He's racing to prove that the system is fair. He's racing to show that no team, no matter how many wins they have, is above the rules. And whether you agree with his methods or not, you have to respect his conviction. Because in a sport where everyone is looking for an edge, it takes real guts to call out the guy who found one before you did. Now it's up to NASCAR. The investigation will happen, the data will be reviewed, a decision will be made, and whatever that decision is, it will shape the rest of the season. If NASCAR clears Larson, SVG looks like a sore loser. If NASCAR finds a violation, Larson's championship hopes could be destroyed. Either way, the drama isn't over. It's just beginning, and that's what makes this story so compelling. It's not just about engine tweaks, it's about integrity, it's about trust, it's about whether the sport we love is being competed on a level playing field, or whether the richest teams are buying advantages that nobody else can afford. Drop a COD in the comments if you think NASCAR should investigate Larson's engine data, and tell us, do you think SVG is exposing a real problem, or is he just playing mind games before Daytona? We want to hear your take. If you want real insider breakdowns of NASCAR's biggest controversies, subscribe. No fluff, no bias, just the stories that matter. And next week, we're diving into the one corner at Daytona where SVG's data shows he's losing 4/10 to Larson's car, and what that means for the race that decides the chase. Don't miss it.